to this week's Fireside Chat with Jesse. I am joined today by Dan McKew, President of Bridge Funding Group. Thanks for joining me, Dan.
No, happy to be here, Jesse.
No, I'm glad to have you on the program, sir. I appreciate your time. So we'll just kind of kick right off here, Dan. And for those people who haven't had the pleasure of meeting you yet, do you mind just kind of introducing yourself and your career in equipment finance?
Dan McKew, long and storied career. I'm embarrassed when I think about how long it is, but I guess I began in the equipment finance business back in the late 80s. Went through the tax changes in the 80s when we created, makers and acres and all that kind of stuff. And I was with a company called PHH at the time, which actually is now Element in some respect. So left them and went to a little bank called Signet Bank in Baltimore. Became the president of their equipment finance company in 1995. They were sold to what was then First Union, which is now Wachovia, in 1995, and I took a group of colleagues and we went over to another little bank headquartered in Richmond, Virginia, called Crestar Bank, and started their equipment finance company. In 1997, they were sold to SunTrust, and SunTrust had 4 equipment finance companies at that point because they were kind of a consolidation of banks, and they let the banks kind of act independently. So when we went there, they made a decision to have one equipment finance company, and somehow or another, I'm not sure how I made it happen, but they gave me that responsibility. So from 1997 to 2010, I was the president of SunTrust Equipment Finance. We grew that to almost $7 billion, which was really fun. We had a very, very good time, but like anything, time runs out. I did a little stuff in Baltimore for a couple of years. I was president of a couple of smaller banks in Baltimore, but then went back to Capital One and took over their equipment finance company. A bunch of their people had left to go into Signature. So I got my band back together from SunTrust. We went over to Capital One. They exited the business in 2016 for reasons that they bought GE Healthcare business. And then the band that I had there went over to Bridge Funding Group here. They had an excess of some people at the time and had a void, and we filled that void. So I guess my career's been one of filling voids for people, but it's worked out pretty well. It's been a good career and a good industry that I knew nothing about. When I got out of school, I was actually an accountant and a CPA, and thought I'd be spending my time in that world, but ended up in the equipment finance world, which honestly, being an accountant has been a very, very positive thing in the equipment finance business, since it's very, very tax based. So I was able to really be able to bridge some gaps and understandings with the banks that owned us on the tax side of the business.
That's perfect. And how did you stumble across the industry?
It's funny. I taught high school out of, I went into public accounting and then chose to teach high school because where I was going to teach, they would pay for me to get my master's degree. So I taught for a couple of years while I got my master's, and got my CPA at the same time. So then I guess I decided it was time to see if I could make any money, because I wasn't making any money teaching. It was interesting. So that was 1980. I was making $9,300 teaching. And, so I went out and looked for an opportunity, and interestingly enough, there was an opportunity advertised in the Wall Street Journal at a company called PHH, which was Peterson, Howell and Heather was the original name, and it was local here in Baltimore. It was out; they were pretty well known, and I had a choice between going there or a bank called Maryland National Bank, which, if you remember back in the late '80s. They were the largest bank in Baltimore, but ran into a little bit of problem and ended up selling their equipment finance business to GE, which became GE Capital out in Hunt Valley. And then the rest of the bank was Bank of America. So I started with Peterson, Howell and Heather, and they were a fleet leasing company. So they leased fleets of vehicles for salespeople. Learned a little bit about the accounting side of that business with the operating lease accounting, and kind of became somewhat of an expert going around and discussing that and some funding options. And then they began their own equipment finance business, and I went over there to run their operations. So that's how it all started.
Perfect. And these jump right in from an operations perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I took over the operations, and then we actually had some issues. The company wasn't making enough money. They were creating too many tax benefits, so they needed to get rid of some tax benefits. So then I became a syndicator. So I started syndicating the business, and I met so many people syndicating and selling the tax benefits. And in those days, if you recall, that we had year ends in April, and year ends in June, and year ends in September. So you were trying to marry up your year ends with the tax benefits that gave you the most value. And all of a sudden, PHH started paying me for the fees that I brought in. And oh my God, this was a whole new thing. I mean, there was salary plus. So I was having kids at the time. So gosh, it was what a great thing to have a bonus based upon, what you could produce.
Absolutely. Like syndications, capital markets. Let's go.
Wow, no kidding. I mean, I don't know whether it was around before that, but that was my first foray. It was quite eye opening, and that started the whole thing.
Fantastic. So I wanted to touch on a couple things. So basically, you started off with an independent, and then for the last 30 years, you've been working for a bank or bank-owned
Correct.
finance company. Now, I know that's 29-30 years ago, but do you miss any of the independent stuff back in the day, or is it just kind of a blur at this point?
I've always toyed with going back. When I left SunTrust and was doing a couple things in the interim, I toyed with a couple of things, and actually even with Capital One, I toyed with doing, Stonebriar. The boys at Stonebriar, who I know very well, they were kind of doing the same thing at the same time, and I was looking at some independent money to do some smaller ticket, kind of higher yielding stuff. So I've looked at it a couple of times, but I was fortunate enough to have a good group of people, and a pretty decent model of how I could work within a bank system. And while the regulation kind of kills you and the credit people are difficult, we were always able to negotiate and navigate through that. So you always want to hit a home run. Home runs are great, but with home runs, a lot of strikeouts happen as well. And we were pretty fortunate as between SunTrust, Capital One, and now Bank United to hit a lot of doubles. And maybe I look back and wish I swung for the fence a couple times more, but in all, it's been pretty good.
And it's a testament to you as a leader. I mean, if your team has followed you to 2-3 different locations, I mean, that's it's a sort of a common theme, because the people who went from Capital One went to Signature, and now you're starting to see them finally break up as some of the senior leaders are getting a little bit older. But
right.
And when that day happened, it's like, well, what's going to happen there? And then perfect storm. Like I got a team.
Yeah. And it's really worked out well, and it's been fun to be with the same people for a long time. And for me, it made it so good because I knew I could count on them, and I knew what they could do, and they knew, how I was going to behave and what I expected. So it just made life easy.
And one of the reasons I do this these chats or have this podcast is so younger people who are coming in, not only learning about some of the history and learning about your career, Dan, it's like sitting there and it's like, look, if something happens with you and your organization, if you're a good asset to a team, there's going to be something else after. I think
there are other opportunities. They and they come from places that you never expect.
Absolutely, sir. Do you mind just kind of introducing Bridge Funding Group?
Bridge Funding Group is a subsidiary of Bank United. Bank United is a kind of an interesting bank, one of the more interesting banks of the, I guess, 4 or 5 I've worked with, they were in receivership, and the guys at North Fork Bank, which were the signature guy. I mean, it's so intertwined. The two guys that ran North Fork Bank, when Capital One bought them, they left and put a bid in and then won this bank in, I think, 2010 or so. They had a lot of FDIC money. They had a lot of funds to invest. They had no loans. So two of the businesses they started were equipment finance and a franchise finance business, both of which are headquartered here in Baltimore, and brought in some pretty good people to start that up and ramp that up as quickly as possible. So that was how Bridge got started. So it's not a very old equipment finance company, and that leadership group left in 2016 to go do that again for another bank. So it just happened to be at that point that I was open and available, and so it was the group with me. So we came over. I guess at that point they were about $800 million in assets, and we grew them to about $2 billion right when the pandemic hit. And the pandemic just caused quite a number of issues in a lot of different ways for everybody. One of the things it caused for Bank United was that they chose to they're a regional bank, and they chose to rather invest nationally, which we were in the franchise business, where they chose to retreat and be the best bank they could be in a regional basis. And that was a time when liquidity was a little tight. So they've made a decision as a bank to basically invest in their core business, and which is understandable. And I've been working with them over the last couple of years to liquidate the portfolio, and I think it's worked well for them. And it's been interesting. It's been interesting, the other side of the business. I've always grown portfolios. Now I'm taking the portfolio and liquidating it for them, and it's but they're in no rush, which is really good because it allows me to do it in a profitable way.
Sure. And as things are, I guess, evolving, or it's a cycle, right? It's all cycles. Would it all of a sudden you're going to be like, hey, by the way, Dan, so you have to start growing this again?
Well, they could. Who knows? Yeah, we all laughed. We laughed about that with Capital One when they chose to get out of business. We said, well, a year or two, they're going to say, well, we need to create tax benefits, so we need to create growth. We need to get back in this business. So that's the way this business is. I mean, we all who've been in this business a long time have seen lots of players come in and lots of players leave and lots of players come back in. And, it's a cyclical business like anything else. And it's also a business that you've got to get very used to kind of the way you play in it. And the way you play in it is you're going to have pretty strong credits, at least in the bank equipment finance world. So you're going to like the credit profile, but you're not going to like the yield profile. And you're not going to like the yield profile because bankers and finance people are used to APRs. They're used to, real yields and not after-tax yields. So it's always about, educating your bank partners, and you really have to look at us on an after-tax basis, not on a pre-tax basis. Because if you look at us from a pre-tax yield basis, we're not going to have the 300 basis point spreads that you would prefer. Now, fast forward that, when your portfolio starts to turn, when you start to get some gains on your residuals, then all of a sudden the bank says, wow, your yields are, of course, that's not part of your yield, but it's part of your profitability. And that's, again, a place where you have to educate the bank and take all that profitability and put it into the yield on the portfolio so they see what the real yield is. And then their eyes start to open and they start to like this business. I always remember in SunTrust when my boss at SunTrust came to me and said, what's going on? And I said, well, we made $15 million in residual gains this year. And he goes, well, I always heard you say that, but I didn't really believe you till now. So it was a real vindication, honestly. And I will tell you, one of one of my super guys who worked with me, Tom Goldsmith, who did everything in all the years. He was a salesperson. He ran sales, but he went on a special trip with the chairman of the board of SunTrust, who had actually hired me at Crestar. And when he asked the chairman, they were all encouraged to ask questions. He asked the chairman, "What about this business? Has been a surprise to you?" And he said, the chairman said, "Well, McKew always told me that there was not residual risk; it was residual opportunity." Because I never believed that until now. So I was vindicated again.
That's fantastic. And well, I shouldn't have snuck up on them. Hey, I've been warning you, it's coming.
Well, they didn't really believe me, honestly.
It's not a bad spot to be in, sir.
No, we always said under promise and over deliver, right? I mean, that's been my mantra for years, and it's always worked better than over promising and under delivering.
So, how many people do you have on the team today?
We're down to 6 or 7 now. I mean, we were, SunTrust, we had 150 here, we had 55, but we're managing the portfolio. Nobody has to leave. We're not making anybody leave, but I sell what I can, and the rest of it we're managing, to the EBOs or to the end of the lease term. So, it's working out okay.
Yeah, and then so you ran SunTrust Equipment Finance from '97 to 2010.
Yeah.
So I guess what was that like, circling back to growing that team and leading? You say it was 7 billion? Is that the number you said?
Yeah, we grew to 7 billion. Yeah, we had a pretty vibrant public finance group. It was probably like 2.5 billion. That was fun. I mean, that really was fun. We grew to 150 people. That the my boss at SunTrust, said to me one time, he gave me my budget, it was up like 10%. I said, 10%? He said, "McKew, when I find a big dog, I ride him hard." So, so that was a nice compliment. I mean, we had a great group. I mean, we had, the salespeople knew how to sell. They knew the spreads we needed. They knew the creds we needed. The credit people were, pretty much on board. Not that we didn't have conversations from time to time. We had good equipment managers who put fair residuals that then brought in good business. So we really had it clicking. It was nice. It was fun, and we always talked about our goal was when it ended to be able to see each other. Whenever we saw each other, we high-fived each other. And today it was 2010 when I left. I still keep in touch with a fair amount of the people who moved on and didn't go with us in some of the other times. And we do that. We talk about the good days, kind of high five over the phone. So it's good.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean, that's a big number. I mean, do you know, I think you said it was a combined of like 4 or 5 different divisions. So
no, it was the equipment finance company, but we had a public finance group. We had a small ticket group, and we had a mid-large ticket group. So, I mean, we just honestly was just all working. I mean, 7 billion. We might have just touched it, but we touched it enough that it's like if you're 5'11" and 7'8", you call yourself 6 feet. I mean, if we touched 7, but we were right there. And then and I think SunTrust is they've still got a nice equipment finance company, but I think it's only about half that size, maybe a little more right now.
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing people leaving banks, I mean, and starting up these different independents now.
Yeah, that's the big thing. Yeah, well, it's a different business today. It isn't with 100% depreciation. That really changed it. The business is just different. And again, banks, they have to be patient with equipment finance. It will pay off if you're patient over a 5 to 7 to 10 year period. You'll find the income and the returns are where they want to be. I had a great corporate tax person at SunTrust, and when I would go down to Atlanta at least a couple times a year to meet with her to make sure that she was telling the management team at SunTrust how valuable we were from a standpoint of saving tax dollars. Banks have a corporate responsibility that they all talk about, that they want to pay some tax, because there are other corporations that pay no tax, which we hear all the time. Of course, those corporations are investing in infrastructure, and the reason they pay no tax is that the government set it up so that they wanted investment in infrastructure. But when you have a company, instead of paying 24, 25% tax, they're paying 15. That's a huge savings.
Absolutely, and especially if rates start to come back down, or
Right.
as things kind of even out. Be interesting to see some of these banks when they try to make that move back. Because obviously the liquidity stuff was a big deal, but
Yeah.
that was what, 24 months ago. That was a real big hammer. And just waiting to see some of that cycle.
Things
eventually
are
come back.
changing again. Banks, pulled back and all wanted to just do business with customers and wanted every customer to use all of the bank's, businesses. But now banks are turning and wanting to grow, and now they're willing to do business with companies that aren't, fully invested in all their businesses. But I guess they're going to hope that they get them, but it's the cycle's back to there.
Is that the world doesn't need to revolve around absolutes? I think that's something that we're somewhat seeing.
Right.
It's like, we typically wouldn't do that type of deal, but it's a bank line. Figure it out.
Right.
So Dan, you've been in the industry for, I'm not going to age you, sir. Just trying to do some quick math in my head here. 30, we'll just say 30 years, 30 plus years. Okay.
Right. That's your math's correct.
From a trade association perspective, I believe our paths first probably crossed at a ELFA, or probably at the time an ELA convention in the mid 2000s. How has that association kind of helped you and helped your team throughout your career?
It's been invaluable. As a syndicator, way back when I started, moved over from kind of operations to syndication, I could go to the convention and see everybody, and so I could save an enormous amount of time and travel and expense because I could go to the convention. But actually, I will say a little, a young guy going to the convention, I had all these people I wanted to see, and I couldn't find them during the day. I just couldn't find them. I'd go to the breakout sessions and I'd be waiting outside. I couldn't find them. Well, of course, as you get more and more in the industry, it was because they were all out playing golf, and I just needed to get part of the golf group. So that was the next phase of growth, to find your way into the golf groups that had the people that you wanted to talk to, that you could build a relationship with. So it was invaluable in many ways to learn to navigate the business, to learn to find the contacts, to just to become part of the business. So it was huge early, and then as I got a little more age and experience, it was a place where I could go and see my peers and catch up with what we're doing and what we're not doing, and how we did it, and how we should do it, and that was always invaluable as well. And it made me. We for a long time, in the mid 90s, had a group of presidents of bank leasing companies who would get together 3 or 4 times a year. It was orchestrated by the B of A guys at the time, but that was for a young guy new to being president of an equipment finance company working for a bank. I just absorbed so much information, and I wouldn't have met them without the ELFA. So the industry and the association's been invaluable.
Well, perfect. I mean, you said the golf course. I was going to make an assumption, if it wasn't the golf course, then maybe you stumbled into the lobby bar. At some
That
point
was after that was at night. Yeah, no question about that. That was but that was at night. Easy.
Yeah, Yeah, I remember my first conference. It's a little overwhelming, especially if when you're on the
Yeah,
younger side, because it's
yeah.
such a tight knit community. But once you get in, it's like, hey, I want to meet this person. I walked up to Dan and said, Dan, you introduce me to these two people. Just kind of walk me right over. So
It was,
things I love about space.
Bank of America used to have a great, investor conference way back, and it was interesting. First time I went, I knew no one, and when I played golf, I was in the last foursome, and then you hang with it, and by the time you get done, you're one of the first couple foursomes with people you've known for years, and it just becomes really fun.
No, absolutely. And then, a question I ask leaders of this industry is, as you were growing different organizations, um, did you have a particular recipe on how you went out, got younger talent to join your team?
We were pretty fortunate. I will tell anybody who's going to be a manager, they don't have management classes that are that make you a good manager and make you be able to run a business. But what you learn, and this is kind of I don't know how to say it other than I learned to manage by the bad managers that I had. I learned to manage by not wanting to be like that person. And when you figure that out, and then the people who are working with you figured out that that's what you're trying to be fair, and you're trying to be nice, but you have a fiduciary duty to what you do, and all of it's got to be balanced. And they do get it. And there were some tough conversations along the way, but they do get it that in the end, it's about having a tomorrow and having an opportunity tomorrow, and not doing something that puts that in jeopardy. Everything from there begins to be word of mouth. We had so many people join us, especially we were a national company, and we needed salespeople around the country. When we would need a salesperson in a certain region, it would be one of our other salespeople that would make a suggestion and give us a line on somebody who would then want to be part of the organization, and they'd want to be part of the organization because they heard good things from their friends. So that's the best way, because otherwise you're doing your basic speed dating, which we all know, 20-minute speed dating. You really don't get to know a person. So to me, it was always best when I had somebody walk in my office, say, I have a great person I'd really like you to talk to. And oftentimes we wouldn't even have a need at the time, but we'd still talk to them because to build a relationship for the opportunity or the chance if we ever did have a need. So, that was, I don't, this is probably something I shouldn't say, because there's some really good executive search people in this industry. I know several of them really well, but I didn't have to use very many of them, because when I had an opening, you would fill it because we knew someone. And it wasn't that I was ever trying to exclude them because they were great people, but we just found our people another way.
Oh, so that's makes complete sense. And then they come with that strong referral and everything. It just makes it that much easier. You don't take a lot of flyers on people and say, well, let's see if it works out. Because
well, and then the person who recommended them would make sure they stayed between the lines.
Well, exactly.
Right.
Well, yeah, you know what? We really don't need this, but we'll go with your recommendation as long as it works out.
That's what happened a lot, which was good, which made everything work.
Sure, having the extra accountability always helps. What advice, Dan, would you have to a younger individual just coming into this industry?
Gosh, to have something that I've never had: patience. If it's so cliche, but if you work hard and you've got some patience, but you're willing to put the time in and learn something, it'll work. I mean, I've got a son-in-law in this business, and he's doing really well, and I think he figured out. And I've said, you got to become an expert in something, and if you can become an expert in, find something that nobody wants to be an expert in, and be an expert in that. It makes you valuable. Then they need you whenever they're doing whatever that is. Um, you know, my first expertise was in FASB 13, if you can remember back. And I became an expert in that. And then anybody who needed to figure out how it was whether something was an operating lease, they had to come to me. I'm not sure that got me where I wanted to be, but it got me started. So, I think that translates into any business. Just find a niche and find somewhere where you can make yourself valuable.
I tell that to my son in regards to different sports that he plays.
Exactly. I told my kids, who a couple of them played sports at decent levels, you don't come from great stock, so you've got to really work hard, and you've got to really show that you can come through in the clutch. That's how you be successful.
Exactly. You yourself can increase your value proposition, especially if you can, like you said, excel in something that other people don't like, because you're always going to be needed.
Right. Which, well, a couple of my kids play defense in lacrosse, because I said, everybody wants to score. Everybody wants to score. Go let them score. You stop people from scoring. That worked out.
It's perfectly fair. Dan, I ask everyone who comes on the program to give me a little fun fact about themselves. So, what do you enjoy doing outside of working in equipment finance?
Gosh, I guess if you talk to anybody, they know that there's just about no sport that I don't enjoy. There's probably very few sports that I don't try to play. I always tell people I probably played 20 sports in my lifetime, and I'm mediocre plus in all of them. So I can play them well enough to play, but I'm never going to be the guy that knocks your socks off. So I think most people know I'm pretty competitive. I've had to try to keep that under wraps throughout my life, but that's part of what's driven me. So, but I've enjoyed my football, enjoy my baseball, enjoy most anything there's a little bit of. Then you know what? And then afterwards, you get a beer with people. That's the fun part. When we're playing, there's nothing more that I want to beat you. But when we're done, let's go have a beer, one way or the other.
Absolutely. And then if you lose, I'll get you next time.
Yeah, we'll get you next time. Don't you worry about that. Yeah.
What was the hardest sport for you to pick up?
Golf. I think golf. Yeah. It's something. It's like anything else. You got to play a lot of it. I had 5 children. It wasn't a situation where I could run out and play every weekend, especially since all my kids were playing pretty much 3 sports, and I wanted to be there. And that's frustrating, because I have some friends that are pretty good golfers, and I'd like to think I'm as good an athlete as they are, and it makes me angry when I go out there and they're 4, 5, 6, 7 strokes better than me in handicap. But that's okay. I can get them, and they can call me a sandbagger, and that's the best word I ever hear.
I love it. Like, my handicap's an 18, but I can play to someone that's a 6.
Mm-hmm.
But they're going to give me the 12 strokes.
That's right. I'm right there with you. And then when you beat them, beat them, they call you a sandbagger. And I love that's a great word, right?
All day long. Let's do
it.
Right.
That's right.
But then, so I can easily par a hole as much as I can double par a hole.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm fine with that, because you have to keep the handicap up for betting purposes.
Well, I'm not fine with that, but it just happens. But I hear you.
I'm just kidding. I'm not purposely.
I know.
Fucking, but
I understand.
So, I know we're going to be, when this airs, a month and a half into 2025. I guess my last question to you is, thoughts on the industry, this year, Dan. Any insights on where you think things are kind of going?
Well, I think the industry is struggled a little bit the last year or so. My friends who are still in the industry, there used to be a lot of velocity, is the word I've used with transactions, where I knew I was getting to the limit of what I could invest in a company, so I'd partner with somebody else to do that, and they'd send some back to me, and it was a great way to to grow your assets, to keep your customer. Everybody respected your relationship with the customer, so they wouldn't call your customer. So it was great. And I'm not saying things aren't the same, but those relationships I have, those people, a lot of those people have retired, and new people coming in, they sometimes have a little different way they look at things. But I think the economy's good. I think companies are starting to buy again. There's still the same level of competition out there, and then some people go away and some people come back. I understand that spreads are going down a little bit again, and we've all been through. But it's finally a good situation. When I was younger, interest rates would go up, interest rates would come down, interest rates would go up, interest rates would come down. It was a great thing to be able to invest and buy and sell, because now as interest rates go down, you can monetize some of that portfolio that you've invested in over the last 2 or 3 years, keep your income up, be investing in the new deals. This is where you make your fees that drive your ROE up, which is good. So, I really think the industry missed that up and down interest rate situation from '08 to 2020. And now some of those people are going to have to learn how that works, because those of us who were before that, we like those peaks and valleys. So I think there's some good possibilities for this industry as we go forth in 25.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's because for over a decade, people only saw that trajectory going one direction. Obviously,
it was so
nothing
flat,
that
so
perfect.
flat. Yeah, and it was, a little bit of inflation has made the equipment I have on on the book that'll be coming off lease more valuable. So all that's a big help.
My final question for you is: I see you're working from. I'm assuming you're at home.
I'm at my apartment in Baltimore. I have so I have an apartment up here to go to.
So not
the office.
not in the office, but someone who worked for a bank for the last 30 years. What are your thoughts on the hybrid or remote, work environment, Dan?
Well, I'm a true dinosaur, and this is where my dinosaur qualities show up.
You're not a dinosaur. I have the same beliefs that you're about to say. I have a feeling.
Well, I was very, very lucky and very, very fortunate. Between I was president of Signet, president of Crestar / SunTrust, president of Capital One, and now president of Bank United. And in each of those 4 roles, it spanned from 1995 to 2025. So that's 30 years of being president of an equipment finance company for a bank. I built with a group of people a culture that was one that people enjoyed enough that they would choose to stay with it and go to another place to keep doing it. I couldn't have built that culture if I wasn't able to walk down the hall and sit down with you and talk with you, or you come into my office, sit down and talk with me, or the occasion when I would invite you to my office and shut the door behind you. And it was to a person, they would say, "This is never good. This is never," but that was okay too. Because you have to have conversations like that sometimes, but you couldn't build a culture that people understood the expectations, understood the decisions, and moved in a very consistent direction. If people were now, we had sales people scattered all over the country, but they knew where the decision making hub was, and the people in that hub knew my thinking enough that if I wasn't there, they had a pretty good idea what direction to go in. And maybe it works in a hybrid environment, but it would seem to me to be more difficult.
I mean, that's I'm thinking now you can get resources that are great assets that are in different locations, but that culture word, right, or camaraderie. So how do you? This I think is really helpful from a sales perspective, but from a cohesiveness perspective, you just don't get that through Zoom.
Well, when we had salespeople remotely throughout the country, we'd have them. They were mandated by me to come into the office, the main office, twice a year. And if we had satellite offices, like when I worked for SunTrust, we had a pretty big office in Orlando and a pretty big office in Atlanta and a fairly big office in Nashville. And I would have to go to each of those offices at least once a quarter to see the people. I mean, that's what I needed to do, because I wanted them to understand and to get a piece of me, so to speak, or a piece of the culture that I wanted them to understand. So that's the part that and you get to know people and you get to support people and you get to know their family and you get to know when they're having a bad day and a good day, and you know what they need if they need something. And I think some of that's lost.
I agree 100%. And that's where, like I said, you build that cohesive unit. That's the unit that you built that's been following you around for the last couple decades. So can you get the same in a hybrid or virtual? I guess time will tell.
Time will tell, and I'll be interested to see how it works. So, but you are hearing some companies are making them come back.
You got that fee you're paying every month for a space. So put some butts in seats.
Yeah, I mean that's a very, very good excuse to make it happen. But I think overall it's the atmosphere and the what's the word I'm looking for? But the culture that is more important. That kind of lives in that space.
Yes, sir. Well, Dan, I really appreciate your time today, sir. Thank you for joining me. It's great to hear your your career. Hopefully our paths cross. Maybe in April. If not, I'll let you know when in Maryland.
I'll be
Grab a
around.
coffee.
I'll can't get rid of the old dinosaurs, So yeah, no, I appreciate it very much. It's good talking to you.
All right, sir. You have a good day. We'll talk soon. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
All right.